My name is George Thompson. I am 68 years old and recently retired from construction work in Pennsylvania. After 45 wonderful years of marriage, I lost my wife Martha last month to cancer. What broke my heart beyond her passing was that our only son, David, chose to attend his wife Amanda's birthday celebration instead of his own mother's funeral. I was still processing this betrayal when he showed up at my doorstep the very next day with a request that left me speechless. Where are you watching from today? Hit that subscribe button if you want to hear what happened next and the unexpected step I took. Martha and I met in high school back in 1970. She was the smartest girl in our class with beautiful auburn hair that caught the sunlight just right. I was the awkward football player who somehow gathered the courage to ask her to prom. To my surprise, she said yes, and that night changed our lives forever. We were just 18 years old when we started dating, and by 23 we were married in the same church where we would eventually say our final goodbyes. Our marriage was solid from the start. We complemented each other perfectly. I was the practical one who could fix anything with my hands, while Martha had the patience and wisdom to navigate life's more complex challenges. We worked hard, saved every penny, and built our life together brick by brick, just like the houses I constructed. David came along 3 years into our marriage. He was our miracle baby after doctors told Martha she might not be able to conceive. The day he was born was the happiest day of our lives. Martha and I poured everything we had into raising him. We read to him every night, attended every school function, and celebrated each milestone as if it were a national holiday. I worked long hours in construction, eventually starting my own small company. The work was grueling, especially in the Pennsylvania winters, but knowing I was providing for my family made every frozen finger and aching muscle worthwhile. Martha became an elementary school teacher, beloved by generations of students in our community. She had a special way with children who struggled, always finding creative ways to help them learn. Education was paramount in our household. Martha and I had both grown up in working-class families where college wasn't an option. We wanted different opportunities for David. We set aside money from every paycheck for his education, sometimes going without new clothes or vacations to ensure his future was secure. David excelled in school, making us proud with each report card. He was studious and ambitious, traits that reminded me so much of his mother. When he got accepted to the University of Pennsylvania with a partial scholarship, Martha cried tears of joy. We had achieved our dream of giving our son opportunities we never had. His college years flew by, and soon he was pursuing a graduate degree in business. During his final year of graduate studies, he met Amanda at a university networking event. She came from a wealthy family with connections that David admired. When he first brought her home to meet us, I noticed how she barely touched the homemade dinner Martha had spent all day preparing. She spoke constantly about her family's vacation home and her father's business connections. Martha squeezed my hand under the table that night, our silent signal when something felt off. Still, we smiled and welcomed Amanda, wanting to support David's choices. After all, Martha always said love was about accepting the whole person, including their decisions. The warning signs continued as their relationship progressed. David started canceling family dinners at the last minute. Phone calls became shorter and less frequent. Martha would leave voicemails that went unreturned for days. When they announced their engagement after just 8 months of dating, Martha expressed gentle concerns about the rush. David brushed them off, saying we just needed to get to know Amanda better. Their wedding was elaborate and expensive, mostly paid for by Amanda's parents. Martha and I contributed what we could, though it felt insignificant next to their lavish spending. During the reception, I overheard Amanda telling a friend she was glad the obligation ceremony was over so they could start their real life away from this quaint little town. After the wedding, the distance between us grew even wider. David and Amanda moved 2 hours away for his new corporate job. Our invitations to visit were met with excuses about busy schedules. When they did visit, Amanda would make comments about our modest home, or ask Martha if she had ever considered updating her vintage kitchen. Martha never complained. She kept sending birthday cards, holiday packages, and weekly texts just to maintain some connection. She defended Amanda, saying adjusting to married life was difficult and that different family backgrounds could create misunderstandings. I wasn't as forgiving, but I respected Martha too much to contradict her optimism. As years passed, David rose through the corporate ranks, largely thanks to connections through Amanda's family. Our invitations to their new home were always met with reasons why the timing wasn't good. Martha continued reaching out, sending thoughtful gifts for their anniversaries and keeping up with their lives through social media since actual visits became increasingly rare. Despite the growing distance, Martha kept David's childhood bedroom exactly as he left it. Sometimes I would find her sitting on his bed, touching his old trophies and yearbooks. "He will come back to us," she would say with unwavering faith. Family always finds its way back together. I wished I shared her certainty. But watching my son drift away, I feared that some distances, once created, could not be bridged by hope alone. The call that changed everything came on an ordinary Tuesday. Martha had gone for a routine checkup, and the doctor found something concerning. Further tests confirmed our worst fears: Stage 4, pancreatic cancer. The prognosis was grim from the start. 6 to 8 months, the oncologist said with practiced compassion in his eyes. Martha took the news with the same grace she approached everything in life. "At least now I know what I am dealing with," she said on the drive home, reaching over to squeeze my trembling hand. I was less composed, pulling over twice because tears blurred my vision too much to drive safely. That evening, Martha insisted we call David immediately. "He deserves to know, George. No matter what has happened between us, he is our son." David answered on the fourth ring, sounding distracted. When Martha calmly explained her diagnosis, there was a long pause before he responded. "That is terrible news, Mom." "I am so sorry," he said, his voice finally breaking slightly. "I will talk to Amanda about visiting soon." Martha smiled at me as if to say, "See, he still cares." I wanted to believe it too. The promised visit took 3 weeks to materialize and lasted less than 2 hours. David seemed uncomfortable in our presence, constantly checking his phone. Amanda had not come, claiming a prior commitment. When Martha tried to hug David goodbye, he patted her back awkwardly and stepped away quickly, as if physical contact with his dying mother was somehow distasteful. As Martha's condition worsened, I became her full-time caretaker. I learned to administer her medications, manage her pain, and help her with basic tasks that became increasingly difficult. My construction company was handed over to my longtime foreman, who promised to keep everyone employed. Martha was my only priority now. We tried calling David weekly to update him on her condition. Sometimes he answered, sometimes we got his voicemail. His visits remained infrequent and brief, always cut short by urgent calls from Amanda requiring his immediate attention. Martha never complained, treasuring every moment with her son regardless of how distracted he seemed. 3 months into her illness, Martha had a particularly good day. She felt strong enough to sit in the garden she had lovingly tended for decades. "Call David," she suggested. "Ask if he can come for dinner this weekend." I did as she asked, though past experience had taught me to expect disappointment. To my surprise, David agreed to come on Saturday. Martha spent Friday preparing, directing me to buy ingredients for David's favorite meal. Though she was too weak to cook, she supervised from a kitchen chair as I followed her instructions. She even asked me to help her put on makeup Saturday morning, something she had largely abandoned as the cancer took its toll. David arrived an hour late, immediately explaining that he could only stay for a short while because Amanda had planned a dinner party that evening. Martha's smile faltered for just a moment before she recovered, telling him how wonderful it was to see him regardless of how long he could stay. During that brief visit, Martha tried to talk to David about meaningful things. She asked about his hopes, his dreams, his happiness. David answered in distracted monosyllables, his attention divided between his phone and the clock. When Martha mentioned some family heirlooms she wanted him to have, he suddenly became more engaged, asking specific questions about her jewelry collection. As David was leaving, Martha gathered her strength to stand and embrace him. "I love you more than anything in this world," she told him. Nothing would ever change that. David nodded uncomfortably and hurried out to his car. That night, Martha cried for the first time since her diagnosis. Not for herself or her illness, but for the son who seemed so lost to her. "Promise me something, George," she whispered as I held her. "Promise you will not give up on him, no matter what. He is going to need you, even if he does not know it yet." I promised, though part of me already doubted whether David would ever allow me into his life in any meaningful way. As weeks turned to months, Martha's decline accelerated. Hospice nurses began visiting daily, gently preparing me for the inevitable. David's calls and visits became even rarer. Martha stopped asking for him, perhaps to spare me the pain of making excuses for our son. In her final week, Martha had a moment of surprising lucidity amid the heavy fog of pain medication. She asked for her phone and called David herself. I stood nearby, ready to take over if her strength failed. I could only hear her side of the conversation, but it was enough to break my heart. "David, my sweet boy." No, I am fine. I just wanted to hear your voice. Do you remember how we used to sing in the car on road trips?" "Yes, that song." "David, I need you to know that I am so proud of the man you have become. No, please do not cry. I have had such joy being your mother." After the call, Martha seemed at peace. "He does love us, George," she whispered. "He is just lost right now. Promise me you will be there when he finds his way back." 3 days later, Martha slipped away in her sleep, her hand in mine as I sat vigil by our bed. In our 45 years together, I had never felt so alone as I did in that silent moment when her breathing stopped and my world collapsed. The day after Martha died remains a blur in my memory. The hospice nurse helped me make the initial calls. Our family doctor came to the house to officially pronounce her death. The funeral home arrived with quiet efficiency to take her body. I signed papers and nodded at appropriate moments, functioning on autopilot while my mind struggled to accept a world without Martha in it. When the house finally emptied of officials and well-meaning neighbors, I sat alone at our kitchen table and forced myself to make the most difficult call. David answered on the 5th ring, sounding irritated by the interruption. "David?" I said, my voice barely steady. "Your mother passed away early this morning." The silence stretched so long I thought we might have been disconnected. Finally, he cleared his throat. "I am sorry to hear that, Dad. How are you doing?" Not "I am coming right now" or "What can I do to help?" Just a polite inquiry, as if I had mentioned a minor setback rather than the devastating loss of his mother. "The funeral will be on Saturday," I continued, ignoring his question because I had no words to describe the gaping hole in my chest. 10 in the morning at Trinity Church. Another pause followed. "This Saturday?" "Dad, that is Amanda's birthday. We have had plans for months. A whole party is arranged." My grip tightened on the phone as the implication of his words sank in. "David, this is your mother's funeral. Your only mother." "I know, Dad, but Amanda has been looking forward to this celebration. We have guests coming from out of town. I cannot just cancel everything." I could not believe what I was hearing. Surely my son, the boy we had raised with such care, could not be suggesting that his wife's birthday party took precedence over his mother's funeral. "Can we possibly move the funeral to Sunday?" David asked, as if we were discussing a dinner reservation rather than Martha's final farewell. "No, David. The funeral is Saturday." My voice had gone cold. "You will need to make your own decision about whether to attend." After ending the call, I sat motionless at the table for hours as darkness fell around me. How had we reached this point? Where had we gone wrong as parents to raise a son who could even contemplate missing his mother's funeral for a birthday party? The next morning, Martha's sister Catherine arrived from Ohio to help with arrangements. Her presence was a blessing. She took charge of contacting extended family members while I met with the funeral director. We selected a casket Martha would have approved of, simple but elegant. I chose her favorite blue dress for her to wear, the one she had worn to David's college graduation. The church secretary, who had known Martha from years of volunteer work, helped arrange for the pastor and church facilities. Martha's fellow teachers organized a reception to follow the service. Throughout these preparations, a part of me kept expecting David to call, to say he had reconsidered, to assure me he would stand beside me as we said goodbye to the woman who had loved us both so deeply. That call never came. 2 days before the funeral, Catherine gently suggested we should confirm with David. Perhaps he just needed time to rearrange things, she offered kindly. I made the call, hope flickering despite my better judgment. David answered, sounding harried. "Dad, I have been meaning to call you. About Saturday." My heart lifted momentarily before he continued. "I just cannot make it work. Amanda is really upset at the thought of canceling her birthday celebrations. She says she understands but feels it is unfair to change plans at the last minute when guests have already arranged travel. Plus, she says funerals are really for the living, and since Mom is already gone." I cut him off, unable to bear another word of these hollow justifications. Your mother wanted to be buried in her family plot at Trinity. The service is at 10. If you choose not to come, that is your decision to live with." That evening, I sat alone looking through our family photo albums. Pictures of David as a toddler, Martha patiently teaching him to tie his shoes. David on his first bicycle. Martha running alongside to catch him if he fell. His high school graduation, with Martha beaming with pride beside him. In every photo, her love for him radiated like sunshine. "How can he not come, Martha?" I whispered to her memory as tears fell onto the plastic protective sheets. "How can he do this to you? To us?" The night before the funeral, I barely slept. I kept hoping for a miraculous change of heart, a late-night call, even a text message indicating David had reconsidered. My phone remained silent. As dawn broke on the day we would lay Martha to rest, I accepted the crushing reality that our only child had chosen his wife's birthday celebration over his mother's final farewell. Saturday morning arrived with inappropriate sunshine, the kind of beautiful spring day Martha would have appreciated. I stood before the mirror struggling with my tie, something Martha had always done for me throughout our marriage. After 3 failed attempts, Catherine gently took over the task, her eyes full of compassion. "She would be proud of you, George," she said softly. "Your strength today would mean everything to her." We arrived at Trinity Church an hour early. I wanted some quiet time in the sanctuary before others arrived. Martha had loved this church, from its stained glass windows to the worn wooden pews where generations of families had gathered in both celebration and sorrow. I sat in our usual spot, half expecting to feel her presence beside me as I had every Sunday for decades. The organist began playing softly as people started to arrive. Martha's colleagues from the elementary school came together, many bringing former students whose lives she had touched. Our neighbors filled several rows, people who had shared holiday barbecues and helped shovel each other's driveways during heavy snowfalls. Extended family members from both sides traveled from across the country. I had asked the ushers to save the front row seat next to mine for David, clinging to the hope that he might appear at the last moment. As the church filled and that seat remained conspicuously empty, I felt the sympathetic glances and whispered questions among the congregation. The service began with Martha's favorite hymn. The pastor spoke eloquently about her life of service to others, her gentle spirit, and unwavering faith. Former colleagues shared memories of her dedication to children with learning difficulties. Martha's oldest friend recalled their 60 years of friendship, bringing both laughter and tears to the gathering. When it came time for me to speak, I approached the pulpit on unsteady legs. Looking out at the faces of those who had come to honor Martha, I was struck by the absence that mattered most. Nevertheless, I cleared my throat and began. "Martha believed that love was the most powerful force in the universe," I said, my voice stronger than I expected. "She loved completely and without reservation. As a wife, she was my anchor and my compass for 45 years. As a teacher, she saw potential in every child who entered her classroom. And as a mother," here my voice broke slightly, but I pressed on. "As a mother, she gave everything she had to our son. Her love was unconditional and endless. That is the legacy she leaves all of us. To love generously, to forgive easily, and to find joy in serving others." The procession to the cemetery was long, a testament to how many lives Martha had touched. At the graveside, I placed a single white rose on her casket before it was lowered into the ground. Catherine stood beside me, her hand firmly gripping mine as we said our final goodbyes. Throughout the day, I kept scanning the gathering for David's face, unable to fully accept his absence even now. Each time the church door opened during the service, each car that approached the cemetery brought a moment of irrational hope, quickly followed by renewed disappointment. After the burial, everyone gathered at the church hall for a reception. I moved through the crowd accepting condolences, thanking people for coming, listening to stories about Martha's impact on their lives. My social smile was firmly in place, though inside I felt hollow. David could not make it? People inevitably asked, their expressions mixing sympathy with awkward curiosity. "He had a prior commitment," I would answer, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. Some nodded uncertainly while others expressed shock that anything could take precedence over his mother's funeral. By late afternoon, the gathering had dwindled to just family. Catherine offered to stay with me, but I gently declined. "I need some time alone," I told her honestly. "But thank you for everything." Returning to an empty house was perhaps the hardest part of that impossible day. For weeks, our home had been filled with hospice workers, visitors, and the equipment of Martha's illness. Now the silence was absolute and suffocating. I wandered from room to room, touching Martha's things. Her reading glasses still lay on her nightstand beside the novel she had been too ill to finish. Her gardening gloves sat by the back door, waiting for hands that would never wear them again. In the kitchen, her collection of hand-painted teacups filled a cabinet, each with a story of where we had found it during our travels. That evening, I sat in Martha's favorite chair by the living room window. Rain had finally begun to fall, matching my mood more appropriately than the earlier sunshine. I held our wedding album in my lap but could not bring myself to open it. The crushing weight of grief was now compounded by a sense of betrayal so profound I could barely breathe through it. How could the child we had raised with such love make this choice? What had we done wrong? Or was it simply that Amanda's influence was stronger than the bonds of family we thought unbreakable? Exhaustion eventually overcame me, and I fell asleep in the chair, still in my funeral suit. I dreamed of Martha, young and vibrant as when we first met, laughing at something I said. In the dream, she touched my face tenderly and whispered, "Remember your promise, George. Do not give up on him." I awoke at dawn, stiff and disoriented. For one blessed moment, I forgot that Martha was gone, that David had not come, that I was now completely alone. Then reality crashed back, and I braced myself for the first full day of the rest of my life without her. As I made coffee, moving mechanically through this simple routine, the doorbell rang. Confused about who would visit so early on a Sunday morning, I opened the door to find David standing on the porch, looking uncomfortable but determinedly casual. "Morning, Dad," he said, as if this were any ordinary visit. "Can I come in? There's something I wanted to talk to you about." I stepped back wordlessly to let David enter the house. He walked past me with an air of familiarity that felt jarringly inappropriate given his absence the day before. I noticed he was well dressed in a polo shirt and pressed khakis, hair perfectly styled, the apparent picture of someone who had enjoyed a pleasant social event rather than mourned his mother. "The house looks the same," he commented, glancing around the living room. "How are you holding up?" The casual tone of his question ignited something inside me. How was I holding up, after burying my wife of 45 years without my son beside me? "I buried your mother yesterday," I said flatly. "You would know how I am doing if you had been there." David had the decency to look briefly uncomfortable, but recovered quickly. "About that, Dad, I want to explain. Amanda was really upset at the timing. She had been planning this birthday thing for months, and when Mom's funeral ended up on the same day, well, you know how Amanda gets when she has her heart set on something." "No, David, I do not know how Amanda gets because you have kept us at arm's length for years," I replied. "What I do know is that your mother loved you until her last breath, and you could not find it in yourself to say goodbye to her." David shifted his weight, glancing toward the kitchen. "Is there any coffee? I could really use some. It was a late night with the party and everything." The casual mention of the party that had taken precedence over Martha's funeral nearly broke my composure. Nevertheless, I led him to the kitchen and poured him a cup of coffee, my hands shaking slightly with suppressed emotion. We sat at the kitchen table where our family had shared thousands of meals. David took a sip of coffee, then set the cup down with apparent determination. "Dad, there is something I wanted to ask you about. It is actually why I came by today." I waited silently, wondering what could possibly be so important that it brought him to my door the day after he had missed his mother's funeral. "Amanda and I were talking last night after everyone left, and she mentioned Mom's jewelry," he began, his tone shifting to what I recognized as his business voice. "She has always admired Mom's pieces, especially her engagement ring with that sapphire, and the pearl necklace Grandma Rose left her." I stared at him, unable to process what I was hearing. Was my son actually here to ask for his mother's jewelry the day after her funeral that he had not attended? David continued, apparently oblivious to my shock. "Amanda thought it would be really special if she could have those pieces to remember Mom by. You know how close they were." This blatant lie was what finally broke through my stunned silence. Martha and Amanda had never been close. Amanda had barely concealed her disinterest in Martha, treating her with thinly veiled condescension on the rare occasions they interacted. "Close?" I repeated, my voice barely controlled. "Your wife met your mother fewer than a dozen times in 7 years of marriage, David. She complained about the food Martha cooked, criticized her clothes, and made excuses not to visit even when Martha was dying. David flushed, but pressed on. "That is not fair, Dad. Amanda was just raised differently. Anyway, Mom would have wanted Amanda to have her jewelry. She would want it to stay in the family." "The family," I echoed. "The family that was not present to say goodbye to her." "Dad, I already explained about the timing. It was just really bad luck that the funeral ended up on Amanda's birthday. Mom would understand. She always did. And that was the painful truth. Martha had always understood, always made excuses for David's behavior, always left the door open for him to return. Even in her final days, she had made me promise not to give up on our son." "Which pieces specifically is Amanda interested in?" I asked, my tone now deliberately neutral. David perked up, mistaking my question for acquiescence. "The sapphire engagement ring, obviously. The pearl necklace and earrings from Grandma Rose. The diamond bracelet you gave her for your 25th anniversary. And I think there was a ruby pendant?" Amanda mentioned that one too. He was describing virtually every piece of fine jewelry Martha had owned, items with deep sentimental and family value. The engagement ring I had saved for 2 years to buy when we were just starting out. The pearls that had been in Martha's family for generations. The bracelet that represented a quarter-century of our marriage. "I see," I said quietly. "And when would Amanda like to collect these items?" "Well, today would be great, actually," David replied with an eager smile. "Amanda is having brunch with her friends, showing off her birthday gifts. I thought I could surprise her with Mom's jewelry when she gets home." The audacity of this request struck me like a physical blow. Not only had my son missed his mother's funeral for his wife's birthday, but he now expected to collect her treasured possessions like party favors to complete the celebration. "I need to think about this, David," I said, standing up from the table. "This is not a decision I can make right now." David's expression shifted to impatience. "Dad, it is just jewelry. Mom cannot use it anymore, and it would mean so much to Amanda. Mom always said she wanted her things to be used and enjoyed, not sitting in a box somewhere." "Your mother is not even cold in her grave," I replied, my voice finally betraying my anger. "I buried her yesterday, alone, while you were hanging streamers for your wife's birthday party. Now you want me to hand over her most precious possessions so Amanda can show them off at brunch. Do you hear yourself, son?" David stood up too, his face hardening. "You are making this way more dramatic than it needs to be. People die, Dad. Their things go to the family. That is how it works." "I need you to leave," I said, suddenly exhausted beyond measure. "I cannot have this conversation right now." "Fine," David snapped, "but Amanda is going to be disappointed. I told her you would probably be reasonable about this." As I showed him to the door, David turned with one parting comment. "Just think about what Mom would want, Dad. She never liked conflict." After he left, I sank onto the sofa, trembling with a mixture of grief and disbelief. Martha had been right about one thing. David was lost. But she had been wrong to think he would find his way back. The son we had raised seemed to be gone entirely, replaced by a stranger who valued his wife's social calendar above his mother's final farewell. I spent that evening looking through Martha's jewelry box, touching each piece, and remembering the occasions connected to them. The sapphire ring I had presented to her at the lakeside where we had our first date. The pearl necklace she had worn on our wedding day passed down from her grandmother. The diamond bracelet that had brought tears to her eyes on our 25th anniversary. These weren't just valuable objects. They were physical embodiments of our life together, our history, our love story. The thought of Amanda wearing them as fashion accessories, perhaps complaining they were vintage or quaint, was unbearable. As night fell, I made a decision. Not one based on anger or revenge, but on clarity about who my son had become and what Martha would truly have wanted for the treasures of her life. Despite her endless capacity for forgiveness, Martha valued respect and integrity above all. She would not have wanted her most precious possessions used as props in a relationship that had caused her so much silent pain. With this resolution in mind, I finally slept, more peacefully than I had since Martha's passing. Tomorrow would bring difficult actions, but for the first time since David's appalling request, I felt certain about the path forward. Monday morning arrived with newfound purpose. After weeks of simply reacting to Martha's illness and death, I now had a clear course of action. I showered, shaved, and dressed in a suit for the first time since the funeral, determined to handle this situation with the dignity Martha would have expected. My first stop was our family lawyer's office. Harold had handled our legal matters for 30 years and had been at the funeral. His assistant fit me in immediately when I called, perhaps assuming it was routine estate business. "George, how are you holding up?" Harold asked, genuine concern in his eyes as he ushered me into his office. "I am managing," I replied, "but there have been some developments that require attention." I explained David's absence from the funeral and his subsequent visit requesting Martha's jewelry. Harold's expression darkened as I spoke. "I would like to update my will," I concluded, "and I need your advice on protecting certain family heirlooms." For the next hour, Harold and I restructured my estate plan. Martha's jewelry would be specifically excluded from any inheritance David might receive. Instead, it would go to Martha's sister Catherine, with instructions that upon her passing, the items should be donated to the women's shelter where Martha had volunteered. The remainder of the estate would be placed in a trust with specific conditions David would need to meet to receive his inheritance. "Are you certain about this, George?" Harold asked gently. Martha always wanted David to be taken care of. She wanted him to be a good man first, I replied firmly. These changes may be the only way to help him become one. My next stop was the bank, where I opened a safety deposit box. The manager, who had known Martha and me for years, processed the paperwork quickly. I carefully placed each piece of Martha's jewelry inside, except for one item I kept in my pocket. After securing the box, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. These treasures were now protected from becoming mere accessories in Amanda's collection. On the drive home, I called Catherine to explain what had happened. Her initial shock at David's behavior quickly turned to support for my decisions. Martha would be heartbroken, but she would understand, Catherine assured me. You are honoring her memory by protecting what was precious to her. That evening, I called David and invited him to dinner on Friday. We should discuss your mother's estate, I explained, keeping my tone neutral. There are some decisions to be made. David sounded immediately interested. Should Amanda come too? He asked. No, this should be between us first, I replied. Just father and son. For the next few days, I prepared methodically for this crucial conversation. I reviewed financial documents, gathered photographs, and mentally rehearsed what needed to be said. This was not about punishment, but about truth and consequences, concepts that seemed increasingly foreign to my son. Friday evening arrived, and I spent the afternoon cooking Martha's special pot roast, the meal she always prepared when she had something important to discuss with David. The familiar aromas filled the kitchen, bringing bittersweet memories of family dinners from happier times. David arrived precisely at 6, alone as requested. He looked slightly wary but maintained his casual demeanor as he entered the house. Smells like Mom's pot roast, he commented, hanging his jacket on the coat rack. It is, I confirmed. I thought it would be appropriate tonight. We made awkward small talk through the first part of dinner, discussing neutral topics like the weather and local sports teams. David carefully avoided mentioning Amanda or asking about his mother's possessions, though I could sense his impatience growing as the meal progressed. Finally, as I served coffee and Martha's apple pie, David broached the subject that had brought him here. So, Dad, you mentioned Mom's estate. Have you had time to think about what we discussed on Sunday, about Mom's jewelry? I set down my coffee cup and looked directly at my son. I have thought about little else, David. His expression brightened with anticipation. Before we discuss that, I continued, I want to ask you something. Why did you really miss your mother's funeral? David shifted uncomfortably. I told you, Dad. Amanda's birthday party was planned months in advance. Guests had already traveled. We could not change everything at the last minute. We scheduled your mother's funeral 3 days after she died. I pointed out quietly. That is hardly last minute, and I find it hard to believe that your friends would have thought less of you for missing a birthday celebration to attend your mother's funeral. It is complicated, David muttered. Amanda had her heart set on this particular celebration. She turns 30 next year and wanted to make a big deal of her last year in her 20s. You know how women are about milestone birthdays. I shook my head slowly. No, David, I do not think this was about Amanda's birthday at all. I think you have spent so many years prioritizing her desires over your family that you no longer know how to make the right choice. I think you were afraid of her reaction if you chose your mother's funeral over her party. David's face flushed with anger. That is ridiculous. I make my own decisions. When was the last time you made a decision that Amanda disagreed with? I asked. When was the last time you stood up to her about anything, particularly regarding your mother and me? David had no answer, his silence more revealing than any protest could have been. I reached into my pocket and withdrew the single piece of jewelry I had kept out of the safety deposit box. Martha's simple gold wedding band. Your mother wore this ring for 45 years, I said, placing it on the table between us. She only took it off when the hospice nurse told her it might become difficult to remove as her condition worsened. She asked me to keep it safe for her. It was the symbol of our commitment, our life together. David stared at the ring, his expression unreadable. I have made some decisions about your mother's possessions, I continued. Her jewelry, including the pieces Amanda expressed interest in, has been secured. They will not be going to Amanda. What? David looked up sharply. But those should come to me. I am your only child. Being a child comes with both privileges and responsibilities, David. You have embraced the former while ignoring the latter for years now. Your mother's jewelry represented significant moments in our lives together and in our family history. They were not meant to be fashion accessories or status symbols. So what are you saying? David demanded. You are just going to keep everything out of spite because I missed the funeral? Not out of spite, I corrected him. Out of respect for your mother's memory and the meaning behind these items. I have arranged for her jewelry to be donated to the women's shelter where she volunteered. They will either use the pieces to help women in crisis start new lives or sell them to fund programs your mother believed in deeply. David's face contorted with anger. You cannot do that. Those things are valuable. They belong in the family. They will serve a purpose your mother would approve of, I replied calmly. As for the rest of the estate, I have made changes to my will. Your inheritance will be placed in a trust with specific conditions. Conditions? What conditions? David demanded. Regular family contact, participation in the charitable foundation your mother and I established, evidence of personal growth and responsibility. Harold has all the details. David pushed back from the table, his face flushed with anger. This is insane. You cannot control me with money. I am not trying to control you, David. I am giving you an opportunity to reconnect with the values your mother and I raised you with, values that seem to have been forgotten in recent years. This is about Amanda, is not it? He accused. You have never liked her. Mom never liked her either, although she was too nice to say it. This is about choices, David. The choice you made to miss your mother's funeral. The choice to come asking for her jewelry before she was even cold in her grave. The choices you make every day that have led you further from the man we raised you to be. David stood up, trembling with rage. You will regret this, Dad. I am going to contest the will. You cannot just change everything because you are grieving and not thinking clearly. I have never been thinking more clearly, I said, rising to face him. And Martha would agree with my decision. She always believed in consequences for actions. She just never had the heart to impose them where you were concerned. Amanda was right about you both, David spat. Small-minded, petty, unable to understand our world. We are better off without this toxic relationship. The words stung, but I maintained my composure. Your mother never stopped loving you, David. She believed until her last breath that you would find your way back to being the man she raised. I promised her I would not give up on you, and I will keep that promise. But love does not mean enabling behavior that dishonors her memory. David grabbed his jacket and headed for the door. Do not expect to hear from us again. Amanda will be furious when she hears about this. I expect she will be, I agreed. But someday, David, I hope you will see past her reaction to understand what really matters. David slammed the door behind him, the sound echoing through the empty house. I slowly cleared the table, wrapping the barely touched apple pie and storing it in the refrigerator. The confrontation had gone much as I expected, though the reality of David's anger was more painful than I had anticipated. As I washed the dishes Martha and I had received as wedding gifts 45 years ago, I wondered if I had just lost my son forever. But deep down, I knew that continuing to enable his behavior would only cement the loss of the David we had raised, the boy who once had a strong moral compass and genuine compassion. Martha's wedding ring still lay on the table where I had placed it. I picked it up and slipped it onto my little finger, the only one it would fit. I did what you would have wanted, I whispered to Martha's memory. I told him the truth with love. The rest is up to him now. The weeks following my confrontation with David passed in a strange mixture of grief and unexpected peace. I had lost both my beloved wife and, it seemed, my only child in the space of a month. Yet having stood firm for Martha's memory and our shared values brought a quiet certainty that I had done the right thing. David made good on his threat of silence. No calls, no texts, not even angry messages demanding I reconsider. Catherine checked in regularly, worried about my isolation, but I assured her I was finding my way forward. Grief is not linear, the support group counselor explained at my first meeting. It is a landscape you navigate differently each day. The support group became an unexpected lifeline. Every Tuesday evening, I joined 8 other people who were learning to live with profound loss. We shared stories, tears, and eventually, even laughter. Martha would have approved of this communal healing. Among the group members was Eleanor, a retired librarian who had lost her husband of 50 years to a heart attack. She had a no-nonsense approach to grief that I found refreshing. Crying helps, she told me during coffee after one session, but so does getting angry, staying busy, and remembering that the person you lost would want you to keep living. Taking her advice, I began volunteering at Martha's elementary school, reading to children twice a week. The librarian set aside books about family, loss, and resilience, somehow understanding exactly what these young students and I both needed. When the school year ended, the principal invited me to a ceremony where they dedicated the library reading corner to Martha's memory. Surrounded by educators who had valued my wife's contributions, I felt her presence more strongly than I had since her passing. Using Martha's jewelry to establish a scholarship took longer than expected. Working with Harold and the Women's Shelter Director, we created the Martha Thompson Educational Opportunity Fund for women rebuilding their lives after domestic violence. The first recipient was a 32-year-old mother of 2, escaping an abusive marriage and pursuing a teaching degree. Martha would have been her most enthusiastic cheerleader. As summer turned to fall, I began renovating our house, starting with the kitchen that Amanda had once called vintage with such disdain. Not to erase Martha's presence, but to honor her frequent wish to update the space. I worked alongside a contractor, contributing my own construction experience. Physical labor provided both distraction and satisfaction as the project took shape. The first holiday season without Martha loomed as a mountainous challenge. Catherine invited me to Ohio for Thanksgiving, but I gently declined. I need to create new traditions here, I explained. Instead, I volunteered serving meals at the community center, finding solace in helping others who were also alone on the holiday. For Christmas, I decided against putting up our usual decorations, which felt too painful without Martha. Instead, I purchased a single small tree and decorated it with ornaments made by children at the school. On Christmas Eve, I placed a wrapped gift beneath it, a first edition of Martha's favorite novel that I had tracked down through Eleanor's librarian connections. The act of giving her this gift she could never open brought tears, but also a strange comfort, a way of including her in the day. In January, 6 months after Martha's funeral, I received an unexpected text from David. "Thinking of Mom today. Her birthday. Hope you are okay." I stared at those words for a long time, unsure how to respond. It was indeed Martha's birthday, a fact I had been acutely aware of since dawn. The message was brief, impersonal even, but it represented the first contact since our confrontation. "Thank you, David," I finally replied. "I visited her grave with fresh flowers this morning." She loved January birthdays because everyone needed celebration during the darkest part of winter. He did not respond immediately, and I did not expect him to. But 3 days later, another message appeared. "Found an old photo of Mom teaching me to ride a bike. Did not remember she was the one who taught me, not you." "She insisted," I wrote back. "Said you needed to learn that falling down was part of moving forward. She was fearless that way." This began a cautious, sporadic exchange of texts, usually centered around memories of Martha. David never mentioned Amanda or my decisions about the estate, and I did not bring them up. These fragile threads of connection felt too precious to risk with difficult topics. In March, David asked if he could call sometime. Our first conversation lasted just 10 minutes and remained safely focused on neutral subjects. But it was a start, a tiny bridge across the chasm that had formed between us. By spring, almost a year after Martha's passing, Our communications had evolved to weekly phone calls and occasional lunch meetings at a restaurant halfway between our homes. During one such lunch, David finally broached the subject we had been avoiding. "Amanda and I are having problems," he admitted, studying his coffee cup intently. "She was really angry about the jewelry, said it showed how little your family respected her." I remained silent, sensing David needed to talk more than he needed my input. "It made me start noticing things," he continued. "How everything is always about what Amanda wants. How I have been slowly cut off from friends, activities, anything she does not approve of, including you and Mom. Relationships are complicated," I offered carefully. "We all make compromises." "There is a difference between compromise and surrender," David said, using one of Martha's favorite expressions. "Mom used to say that. I never really understood what she meant until recently." Over the following months, David shared more about his marriage troubles. Amanda had been furious about losing the jewelry she had counted on receiving. She began criticizing David constantly, blaming him for failing to secure his rightful inheritance. When David started questioning her control over other aspects of their life together, the relationship rapidly deteriorated. In August, 1 year after Martha's funeral, David asked to visit the house. He arrived looking both nervous and determined, carrying a small package. "I found this in my old desk," he said, unwrapping a clay handprint he had made in elementary school, a Mother's Day gift Martha had treasured. "I thought it should be here, not packed away in my office." We sat in the newly renovated kitchen, the handprint placed carefully on a shelf, alongside family photos I had recently brought out of storage. "I miss her," David said simply, "and I am sorry I was not there to say goodbye." "She knew you loved her," I replied, remembering Martha's unwavering faith in our son. "Did she?" David asked, his voice breaking slightly. "Even after I disappointed her so many times?" "Your mother's love was never conditional, David. She believed in you even when your choices hurt her. She always said you would find your way back eventually." David wiped away tears. "Amanda moved out last month. She said I have changed, that I am not the man she married." "Have you changed?" I asked. "I hope so," he replied. "I am trying to remember who I was before I started seeing myself through Amanda's eyes. The person Mom and you raised me to be." That evening, I showed David the scholarship fund created with Martha's jewelry. He read through the materials silently, pausing at the photo of the first recipient and her children. "Mom would have loved this," he said finally. "It is exactly what she would have wanted for her things. Not sitting in a drawer, but helping people start over." Later, as David prepared to leave, he hesitated at the door. "That trust you set up, with the conditions. I understand why you did it, and I am not asking for anything to change. But I want you to know I am trying to meet those conditions not because of the inheritance, but because they are the right things to do. That is exactly why the conditions exist," I told him, "to remind you of what matters, not to control your choices." As the second year without Martha progressed, David and I slowly rebuilt our relationship on new, more honest foundations. He began attending the charitable foundation meetings, eventually joining the board. He started dating again, this time a kindergarten teacher whose patience and genuine warmth reminded me a little of Martha. My own life developed new dimensions as well. The school reading program expanded to 3 days weekly. Eleanor and I began attending concerts and community events together, enjoying companionship without romantic pressure. I joined a hiking group, exploring trails Martha and I had always intended to visit. On the second anniversary of Martha's passing, David and I visited her grave together. As we placed fresh flowers beside her headstone, David asked, "Do you think she would be proud of us now? Of who we are becoming without her?" I considered the question carefully. "Your mother once told me that the true measure of her life would be the ripples she left behind. The students she inspired, the family she nurtured, the community she served. By that measure, her life continues to matter enormously. And yes, I think she would be proud of the ripples we are creating in her memory." Standing there in the peaceful cemetery, I reflected on the painful journey of the past 2 years. Martha's death had revealed both weaknesses and strengths I never knew existed. David's betrayal and subsequent growth had taught me that love sometimes requires difficult stands rather than easy capitulation. Most importantly, I had learned that honoring someone's memory means upholding their values, not just preserving their possessions. "Life gives us moments that define us," I told David as we walked back to our cars. Your mother always believed that it is not the challenges we face that matter, but how we respond to them. By that standard, I think we are finally finding our way. That evening, alone in the house that no longer echoed with emptiness, I sat in Martha's reading chair by the window. The pain of her absence would never completely disappear, but it had transformed into something I could carry without being crushed by its weight. "You were right, Martha," I whispered to her memory. "He did find his way back. We both did. What choices have you had to make that tested your values and principles? Have you ever had to take a difficult stand with someone you love, knowing it might damage your relationship? Life often presents us with these challenging moments that define who we are. Please share your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, hit the like button, subscribe to hear more stories of family, healing, and finding strength in difficult times, and share this with someone who might need to hear that standing firm for what is right can sometimes be the most loving choice we make. Thank you for listening to my story today. Remember, the hardest paths often lead to the most meaningful destinations.